In this world, there is only space and time. You have to be somewhere at a particular moment in time. That's the only reality that there is. And one of the things the Druids did is honor space and time. They built their whole magical philosophy based on these two parameters. And so let's consider those two things. I'll make a separate video on the time condition, but the power points in space are what we're looking at today. First of all, let me just make the point. It's pretty obvious when you think it through, but a lot of people don't really think about it. If we want to call up magical forces, and we can envision those as higher aspects of ourselves or other beings that can communicate with us on the subtle realms. If we want to call them up, we must get ourselves in the highest state we can before we do that. That's common sense. We have to do everything that's normal and ordinary before we launch ourselves into the higher realms. And that simple common sense imperative can inform most of what we do in the magical world. In contradistinction to that, there was a time when I wanted to do a ritual, and I went to the Rollright Stones in England. It was on a full moon, and there was a bunch of people there, and they thought they were celebrating the full moon in a sacred way by drinking alcohol. And I think it's great to have a drink now and again, but you just don't mix that with magic. You just don't do that. Magic's all about the clarity and power, incisiveness of your mind. So you don't do anything which diminishes that. That's obvious, isn't it? So work out what works for you to make you feel strong, clear-minded, unemotional. You know, just get that right first before you start enhancing that by the use of magical tools. Now, to develop sacred space requires us to consider two sides of this equation. First of all, to be sensitive to what is already there and just tune into that on the one hand. But secondly, to create it, to do whatever you can to actually get into the highest state of being wherever you are. So if you go to a particular place in order to enhance the magical power that can be conjured there, remember to bring yourself into a state of grace when you do that. And you'll have your own techniques. It's common to use a candle, incense, music, sound, mantra. These tools of magic to get yourself into the right condition. So even though we're talking about physical space, we're acknowledging that there is a physical space within. There's a physicality to our inner experience. And one of them is how quickly you're breathing, how slowly you're breathing, how deeply you're breathing. If you want to create a fiery outcome, you can increase the rhythm of your breath. Hyperventilate almost, and that really does get you into a heightened state of being, if that's your purpose. If your purpose is more to tune in to the mystery, then you'll want a slow breath. And that changes your whole inner condition. So too is what you take into your mouth. As I say, alcohol doesn't really work very well. Not usually, sometimes perhaps, but not typically. Certain foods would diminish your capacity to practice magic. It's generally thought to enhance your sensitivity, that fasting is useful. So consider the inner physicality, the inner space of your being, as well as the outer dimension. Now, the first thing to do is to create an altar in your living space. Have a special point in your own private space which is dedicated to sacredness, and have it decorated with emblems of that, tokens, artworks, pieces of memorabilia maybe. If you've had a powerful event in the past, then whatever physicality you can associate with that has magic. In my tradition of Sufism, this is thought to be the case with the tasbih, the prayer beads. You consider those to be your most precious possession. Every time you use the tasbih, you kiss it. And so when I pick up my prayer beads, I get myself into a different state. And even though that's not like a physical place, I make sure that whenever I'm using it, I'm in a particular place and way of being, and I never use it casually. I'm always prayerful when I use it. So we're kind of programming ourselves with the use of this physical object. However, the concept of sacred space is much wider than that. I think we have to acknowledge that beauty is magical. It's an illusion. When you actually look at something beautiful very, very closely, you will find it loses its beauty. We need to perceive beauty from a distance. We need to keep it mysterious. And we can apply this to such things as nature, obviously. Certain aspects of nature hold magical power because of their beauty. I'm thinking of waterfalls, of moonlit lakes, of certain rivers and streams and woodlands and deserts and mountains. And you might want to choose which of those places best supports your purpose. So if you want to work with fire magic, then a desert is really quite good. Mountains would support air magic. The forests would be tuning into the realm of 7 unicorns and fairies and elves and so on. So certain natural places support different kinds of magic. Now, magic isn't new. It's been practiced for thousands of years, and in times long gone by, a huge amount of community effort was invested in building standing stones, and these are very common where I used to live in England. And we would notice that certain configurations like circles or lines or fogus, quoits, various sort of ways that you can work with stone create actually a different atmosphere. And it is atmosphere that we're trying to create. The atmosphere of certain physical phenomena, especially stone, I found. But it could be wood. There is a particular atmosphere associated with trees. Different trees have got different magical properties. For example, I feel very differently if I'm standing under a huge weeping willow compared to in front of an oak tree. And if you've ever had the opportunity to be within a yew forest, that's an extraordinarily strange atmosphere. Now, you have to train yourself to be aware of this and develop that knowledge by practice. But soon you'll find that associations develop, and you can use the wood from different trees for different purposes. You'd make your wand from oak if you wanted that kind of magicianship, or willow, or silver birch, or whatever works for you. You can also be aware of the knowledge of flowers and herbs and so on. And where these grow, they create the atmosphere associated with their magic. So let's say, take for example, in a beech forest, at a certain time of year, there's an ocean of bluebells, and that particular colour, the beech leaves and the blue of the bluebells, and the the sense of springtime and the wind, that creates its own magic. And if we ignore this, we're missing something really very important indeed. Now, we can sanctify any space by ritualizing our relationship with it, with that space. So if, for example, you create a circle of people, that itself is a sacred space just because you've made a circle. And if that circle of people all face in the same direction to the north, and they invoke the powers of the north, and then the east and the south and the west, and you open the circle by calling in the directions, that space then is sacred. You have created sacred space. We can also think about the obvious constructions of the modern day temples, whether these are cathedrals or churches or whatever, mosques and so on. Places where people have gone to pray somehow absorb their sacredness and hold it in the atmosphere of that place. So even if you might not be a Jewish person, a synagogue would hold something special for you. And so even though you might not want to support the religion of a certain temple, you could use the temple space for your purposes, quietly and perhaps secretly. But the idea here is that we can not only create sacred space, but we can recognize it where other people have created it in the past. And so I'm underlining the importance of choosing where to do your practice and recognize what already is in place and build the sense of sacredness by constantly practicing your magic in the same place yourself. One more thing I've done myself, I have a half-acre garden, and I've spent a beautiful period of time, several years, building special features in the garden. I have 7 special big stones in a circle, and I have planted 11 trees in another circle. And I've built a temple to Puck and Bridie in another area of the garden out of stone and of growing things, moss, willow, and some flowers. And these places have become very atmospheric, and that's where I would go for contemplation or meditation. If you plant a garden in a magical way, then it continues to evolve. And it pulls down sacredness into its very being. So, be creative with it. Make up your own magical spaces.